This is Scare You Awake, a quiet broadcast of eerie stories meant to play softly in the background. If you're listening to this right now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
There's a bridal shop with a mannequin known as La Pascualita. She's been standing in the front window since 1930. Locals believe she isn't a mannequin at all, but the preserved body of the shop owner's daughter, who reportedly died just days before her wedding. People say her skin looks too real, they can see veins beneath her hands, that her eyes seem to follow you as you move past the window. Employees have claimed her position changes overnight, even though no one admits to touching her. The shop has never allowed close-up photography of this mannequin, and after nearly a century, no one has proven she's fake. To this day, she's still dressed as a bride, preserved in a moment that was never meant to last forever. Have you ever noticed how many skulls archaeologists find buried facing the wrong way? There's a reason for that. In medieval Europe, people were genuinely afraid the dead could come back to life. So, when someone was suspected of being a vampire, a witch, or just not right, they'd be buried face down. The idea was that if they tried to dig their way out, they'd dig deeper into the earth instead of back to the surface. In some graves, archaeologists have even found skulls placed between the legs, or stones shoved into the mouths to keep the dead from biting their way out. Now, these weren't criminals or monsters, although that's what they were framed as. They were neighbors, family members, people someone was scared of after they died.
Did you know that in several old European and Slavic traditions, birthdays weren't celebrated at all because they were believed to be the day your name was reviewed? The belief was that every person's name was written down at birth by unseen record keepers. Once a year, on the exact day you were born, the name was checked again, but not to grant wishes, to take inventory. This is why birthdays were once called name days in many religions, and why people avoided drawing attention to themselves on that date. Loud celebrations were believed to signal that you were ready to be noticed. There's a reason candles were counted carefully. If you lit more candles than your age, it was considered an invitation, as if you were asking for time that wasn't promised. But lighting fewer was worse. That was seen as accepting an early ending. Some families refused to say happy birthday until the day after. Others waited until sunset, believing the morning hours were when names were read and the night was safer. Folklore says that if you feel unusually tired, emotional, or off on your birthday, it's because something has already checked your name and lingered a little longer than usual. Not to hurt you, just to remember you.
Did you know that in parts of Germany and Central Europe, people believed there were nights in winter that didn't fully belong to the year at all? Nights when time felt loose and the rules people lived by stopped working the same way. During these nights, known as the Rauhnächte, families avoided loud noises, they didn't travel, and they never hung laundry outside. The belief was simple. Anything that felt out of place could attract something else that was wandering. And those wanderers weren't monsters. They were believed to be spirits that no longer had a home, drifting until the year finally settled. One of the strongest warnings was about silence. If your house felt unusually quiet on nights like this, it wasn't considered peaceful, it was considered occupied. December 22nd was believed to be the night for paying attention, watching, listening, and noticing what feels different. Because according to the legend, if something made itself known, it wasn't trying to scare you. It was responding. Did you know that in Western folklore, oranges became symbols of wealth and generosity during winter? For centuries, finding an orange in a stocking was tied to the story of St. Nicholas, who is said to leave gold for families in need. Oranges stood for coins, bright, golden, and valuable during the coldest time of the year, when fresh fruit was really hard to come by. For many families, an orange in winter meant abundance after hardship. It meant generosity and care, and the idea that something sweet could still arrive near the end of a long year. And that symbolism shows up all over the world. During Lunar New Year, oranges carry the same meaning of wealth and prosperity. Their golden color represents money, and even the language reinforces it. The word for orange is closely tied to words connected to good fortune and gold. Oranges are given as gifts and they're placed near doorways. They're also kept in homes to invite blessings for the new year ahead. In some traditions, oranges were also believed to protect the household. Their brightness and sharp citrus scent marked a fresh start and helped keep misfortune from following people into the new year. So you see, different cultures, same symbol. Round, golden, bright, something you bring with you into the next year on purpose.
Did you know that in the 1800s, especially in Victorian-era homes, mirrors were treated very differently than they are now? In family photographs from that time, mirrors are often turned slightly away from the camera or covered entirely.
And this wasn't done for decoration. People believed mirrors could hold on to presence, especially in rooms where someone was sick, exhausted, or emotionally unwell. There was a fear that reflecting someone while they drifted in and out of consciousness could leave part of them behind in the glass. That belief carried into everyday routines. When someone was ill, mirrors in the room were covered before nightfall. Journals and household notes mentioned mirrors darkening or fogging enclosed rooms where no moisture should have been present, and the explanation given wasn't environmental. It was assumed the room had absorbed too much of something human. Even early photographers wrote about avoiding mirrors during long exposures because reflections were thought to interfere with more than just light. So, the discomfort people still feel when staring at their reflection while overtired or emotionally drained isn't new at all. It's an old instinct, passed down from a time when mirrors were treated as something that watched back. Okay, so along the coast of Scotland, especially near the Northern Islands, there's this old legend about selkies. Selkies were said to live as seals in the sea, but on certain nights they could come ashore, shed their seal skin, and walk on land as humans. The stories say that if someone found the selkie's skin and hid it, the selkie couldn't return to the ocean. In some versions, they stayed, they married, they had children. They learned how to live a quiet human life. But the legends always mention the same thing. The selkies were never fully at peace. They would stare out at the water for hours. They would grow restless. Some stories say they could hear the sea calling to them, especially at night, even if they didn't know why. And legend goes that the moment a selkie found their skin again, they returned to the ocean, sometimes without a goodbye, sometimes leaving their family behind. Scottish folklore says that seals crying on the shore aren't just animals. They're selkies remembering who they were and what they had to leave. So there's this one legend that sounds beautiful right up until you realize how horrifying it actually is. It's called the Bavanshi. In Scottish folklore, she appears as a woman in a green dress, dancing alone in the Highlands, waiting for tired travelers or hunters to notice her. If a man accepts the dance, the stories say she slowly drains his blood while they move together, leaving nothing behind by morning but claw marks in the dirt. Iron was the only thing believed to stop her, and this is why hunters slept with iron in their boots. So, if you ever hear music in the woods when no one else is around, folklore says you don't follow it. In the 16th century, travelers along the Scottish coast began disappearing without a trace near Benanehead. Horses were found wandering alone, belongings washed up on shore, but there were never any bodies recovered. According to the legend, the disappearances were linked to a man named Sawney Bean. Sawney lived hidden inside a massive sea cave with his wife, children, and grandchildren, more than 40 people in total. Allegedly, they survived by ambushing travelers at night, dragging them back to the cave, and doing the unthinkable to stay alive. For years, locals blamed the storms, bandits, or the sea itself. It wasn't until a couple fought back during an attack that the truth allegedly came out, and what authorities found inside that cave was said to be far worse than anything they'd ever imagined. Some historians argue the story was exaggerated or even propaganda, but others believe it began with something very real and very human. During the Irish famine, people didn't just leave Ireland because they wanted a better life. Many of them were already starving when they boarded ships, and those ships were so overcrowded, so filthy, and so poorly supplied that they earned a nickname that still feels cruel to this day. They were called coffin ships. Now, these ships weren't meant to keep people alive. They were meant to move bodies cheaply across the Atlantic, and disease spread fast. Typhus, dysentery, sometimes killing entire families before they ever saw land again. There are recorded cases where passengers were so weak that when someone died during the journey, their body wasn't discovered for days because no one had the strength to move them, or even speak up. And when those ships finally reached North America, not everyone was allowed to disembark. Some ports even forced sick passengers back onto the water, knowing full well they wouldn't survive the return trip. The saddest part is that for many families, the famine didn't end when they left Ireland. It just followed them across the ocean.
Nowadays, New Year's Eve is usually treated like a big celebration, but for a long time, people didn't see it that way at all. It was more like a quiet checkpoint, a moment where you were supposed to stay aware instead of distracted, because the shift from one year to the next wasn't considered automatic. It was something you moved through carefully. That's why so many old customs focused on staying awake, keeping lights on, opening doors, and filling the space with sound. Bells were rung, music was played, even pots were banged together, not as a party, but as a way of clearing out whatever didn't belong before time moved forward again. There was a belief that whatever you were still holding on to during that transition, stress, resentment, old habits, even unfinished grief, had a tendency to follow you even if you didn't acknowledge it at first. So whenever you're hearing this today, whether it's early in the morning or later when the day slows down, it's a good moment to check what you're carrying. Did you know that in the late 1800s, Paris pulled a young woman from the Seine River? No one knew who she was, she didn't have any identification, and no one was even looking for her. There was no obvious sign of violence either. What people noticed was her face. It was calm, peaceful, almost like she'd fallen asleep. Because she went unclaimed, she was taken to the Paris morgue, where unidentified bodies were displayed publicly in hopes someone might recognize her. But sadly, no one ever did. Someone working there was so struck by her expression that they made a death mask of her face before she was buried. That mask spread across Paris, then all of Europe. Artists kept it, writers, they obsessed over it. She became known as the Unknown Woman of the Seine. Decades later, the same death mask was used as the model of the CPR training mannequin, meaning millions of people have learned how to save a life on the face of a woman whose own story was never told. In the Scottish Highlands, there's an old belief that if you see a woman washing clothes in a river late at night, someone nearby is about to die. She's called the Bania. She appears hunched over cold water, scrubbing blood-soaked clothing that doesn't belong to her. The garments are torn, heavy, sometimes unmistakably modern, sometimes still warm. The lore says the clothes belong to people who haven't died yet. If you watch her quietly, you'll see names stitched into the fabric. If you recognize one, it's already too late. But here's the terrifying part. If the Bani notices you watching, she may speak. And if she does, you're given a choice. Answer her questions honestly, or become the next garment she washes. Some say she's the ghost of a woman who died in childbirth. Others say she's older than death itself, a sign to prepare souls before the body even knows what's coming. So if you ever hear water sloshing where no river should be, and rhythmic scrubbing in the dark, don't look. And whatever you do, don't let her see you watching. Here's a theory about the Titanic that never quite goes away no matter how much time passes. The idea is that the ship that sank that night wasn't actually the Titanic at all, but her nearly identical sister ship, the Olympic. Now, the Olympic had already been badly damaged in an earlier accident and was becoming quite the financial disaster. The theory says that the two ships were secretly switched, repainted, and renamed because scrapping the Olympic would have cost the White Star Line millions, while an insurance payout from a new ship would solve everything. Supporters point out that the passengers and crew noticed small details that just didn't line up, like mismatched interior features, altered porthole placements, and nameplates that appeared to be hastily changed. Here's the part that really unsettles people. Several powerful figures who were supposed to be on the Titanic canceled their trips at the last minute, while others who opposed major banking reforms were on board. So the question lingers, was the Titanic an unimaginable accident, or was it a carefully disguised ship sent out knowing it would never make it back? What are your thoughts? In the 1100s, villagers in Woolpit, a small farming village about 90 miles northeast of London, discovered two children wandering alone near a wolf pit. At first glance, they looked human, except their skin was green and they spoke a language no one recognized. They refused bread, meat, and milk and would only eat raw beans, and this confused the villagers even more. Over time, the boy became ill and died, but the girl survived, and as she learned English, the green color slowly faded from her skin. When she was finally able to explain where they came from, she said they lived in a land where the sun never fully rose, a place of constant twilight, and that they had followed their family through a cave before suddenly finding themselves in our world. What makes this so unsettling is that medieval people recorded the event plainly, treating it as something that genuinely happened rather than a story meant to entertain, leaving historians today still unsure how two children like that ever appeared at all. There are quiet backroads in Ireland that people still avoid after dark. Now, they're not dangerous in an obvious way, but too many drivers have passed through them and arrived somewhere else feeling like time slipped, like something happened in the space between one breath and the next. There's one stretch near the boglands where people swear they've seen a woman standing in the road late at night. She's barefoot and she's standing completely still.
Her head is lowered as if she's staring at the ground, or maybe at something only she can see. If you slow down thinking she might need help, she never reacts. Instead, she just begins to move closer in that slow, drifting way that makes your chest tighten before your mind can explain why. And then, she's gone. Now they say your car won't move no matter how hard you press the pedal, the air inside turning thick and damp, heavy enough that every breath feels like pulling it through wet wool. While somewhere just outside the vehicle, there's a soft dragging sound circling the doors, followed by the faint scrape of fingertips tracing along the metal. When the pressure finally lifts and the engine starts again, drivers step out to find muddy handprints smeared low along the sides of the car, and they're always fresh. Locals believe she's the ghost of a woman who wandered the bog during the famine until her body finally gave out, and now she waits for anyone willing to notice her, to acknowledge her, to make the mistake of stopping. There are quiet back roads in Ireland that people still avoid after dark. Now, they're not dangerous in an obvious way, but too many drivers have passed through them and arrived somewhere else feeling like time slipped, like something happened in the space between one breath and the next. There's one stretch near the boglands where people swear they've seen a woman standing in the road late at night. She's barefoot and she's standing completely still. Her head is lowered as if she's staring at the ground, or maybe at something only she can see. If you slow down thinking she might need help, she never reacts. Instead, she just begins to move closer in that slow, drifting way that makes your chest tighten before your mind can explain why. And then, she's gone. Now they say your car won't move no matter how hard you press the pedal, the air inside turning thick and damp, heavy enough that every breath feels like pulling it through wet wool. While somewhere just outside the vehicle, there's a soft dragging sound circling the doors, followed by the faint scrape of fingertips tracing along the metal. When the pressure finally lifts and the engine starts again, drivers step out to find muddy handprints smeared low along the sides of the car, and they're always fresh. Locals believe she's the ghost of a woman who wandered the bog during the famine until her body finally gave out, and now she waits for anyone willing to notice her, to acknowledge her, to make the mistake of stopping.
In several European folk traditions, birthdays were believed to be moments when the veil between worlds thinned, because you weren't just aging, you were crossing from one year of life into another. And any kind of transition was thought to draw attention, not from people, but from things that linger. That's why birthdays were once treated cautiously. It was believed you shouldn't cry on your birthday because strong emotion could act like a signal. You weren't supposed to make your wish out loud because saying it was thought to give unseen listeners something to interfere with. And being alone in the dark on your birthday was considered especially unlucky. People believed spirits were drawn to moments of vulnerability, and birthdays were one of them. That's also why candles mattered so much. They weren't originally about wishes. Fire was used for protection. Blowing out the flame symbolized closing the doorway, sealing yourself safely into another year. So if birthdays ever feel emotional, heavy, or strangely reflective, folklore would say that's not random. It's the veil thinning, just for a moment. Be sure to follow for more Coffee Time and Legends.